think we needed that. You needed to have that tension where like the young people were so eager to make change and to really like push almost to like to the disadvantage of what the progress that had already been made at Robben Island. But at the
Mm.
same time, you still needed the older generation to also pull them back and try to say, hey, this is a long game here. I understand that you want to make change right away, but understand that we have to run this like a marathon, not a sprint.
Mm.
But you needed both of those sides, like the older generation saying, hey, slow down, and the younger generation saying, hey, speed up. And then that tension is where progress is made. And I think
Mm.
that was the thing that he said that was so poignant and stuck with me to this day about like, and we all deal with that, right? Like in our lives in terms of you want things to improve, you want to be better, you want to be, you want to be wealthier, you want to be healthier, you want to be,
Mm.
all of these things and you want it to happen now. But at the same time, like you also still need to be patient, and
Yeah.
it's very hard to deal with that, especially as you're growing up as an adult, like in your 20s. I know that a lot of young people, they deal with that where they feel like they're far behind in life. But
Yeah.
as you get older, you realize like, you know things are where they need to be. But you needed both of those sides ultimately to kind of push you to where you are today.
Welcome to the Taking Out the Mask podcast. My name is Ashanti Branch, and I'm really glad you joined us. Today's guest is Jonathan Santiago. Jonathan is a marketer and a creator. And in this conversation, we talk about traveling, we talk about family, we talk about adventure, we talk about figuring out who we are and identity. Uh, Jonathan talks about like traveling to over 30 countries and visiting the world and exploring what's out there. And, when we were talking about traveling, one of the stories that came to my mind is this one trip I took to Mexico. Um, Met some friends in Mexico City that I met brand new, and they invited me to a trip to go to Huautla de Jimenez. That's where Maria Sabina's home is, and it was a wild adventure. And one of the things that I experienced when we got to Huautla de Jimenez was that we got off the bus and we were walking through the mountains. Now, I like outdoors, and it was kind of rainy, so no big deal. But all of a sudden, I got on the road and I'm like, where am I? First of all, I don't know where I am. I'm following the people I met, and I'm in the middle of nowhere. I don't have a map. I don't know. I don't know we're going to a guy named Don Julio, Don Julio. That's his name. I didn't think about it to halfway on this road, walking an hour, that Don Julio is the name of a tequila, and I'm like, Do, are we? Am I safe? It was hours into the trip. We'd already took an 8-hour bus ride from Mexico City to Oaxaca. I am now walking on a wet, rainy road, and now I'm scared. Now I'm like, what did I just do? Like at no point before did any of my intuition say this is not a good idea. But in this moment, looking for Don Julio's house, I'm wondering what's going on. And then we pop out of another turn. They said, "We're almost there. We're almost there." And my little, I guess you can call it anxiety, was picking up. I was worried. I was starting to get worried. And we pop out of the side of this hill, and they said, "There it is, right there, Don Julio's house." And Don Julio came out, and his wife came out, and his son came out, and they were like, "Hey!" They didn't know me. They knew the other guys, and they were like, "Welcome back, bienvenidos, que milagro." And I was like, and I don't even know where the fear came from, but I think sometimes I just want to trust. I want to fully trust, and sometimes, have you ever had a time where you felt like you trusted and it went wrong? Maybe that's where some of my fear came up. I'm really excited about this conversation because as we talk about not only our mask, we get to talk about family. And sometimes our family is looking to us to be that for us, that the trusting figure. And sometimes we wonder, is it the family I would have created? I would have designed if I had the magic pen to design it. But knowing that it's the family I got, and how do I make the most of it? So I'm excited for Jonathan to be a part of this conversation. I'm excited for you to be along this journey with us. And if you haven't yet made a mask, we invite you to go do so at 100kmasks.com. 100kmasks.com. Be a part of the Million Mask movement. And I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thank you. Welcome to the Taking Off the Mask podcast. My name is Ashanti Branch, and I'm really glad you joined us. Today's guest is Jonathan Santiago. And Jonathan's going to tell you all about his background, but I'm really excited to connect with Jonathan on this call. He has a podcast that I've been listening to, and we were on a call the other day, and I asked him would he be willing to be on the show, and I'm glad he was willing to. So, Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on, Ashanti. It's nice, it's very like serendipitous that we we managed to connect again recently, and glad to be on the show. I was very honored when we connected that you had mentioned that you listened to my show. It's the first time I've gotten a chance to connect with a listener of my show, but it's awesome to be a guest here on yours.
Right on, man. Well, will you tell folks about you and tell them what information you would like them to know? I really like the guests to do the intro and share what is it about them that they want people to know about them, and then we'll jump right in.
Yeah, well, I mean, for everybody out there listening, obviously, how Ashanti and I connected is actually I work for a company called Video Husky, and our mission is to help video creators achieve their dreams. In terms of building their audiences and offloading the heavy lifting that is video editing. And so, Ashanti is actually somebody who started working with us recently, and that's how we got connected. But I've been working with Video Husky and in this content creator space now for a little more than a year and a half. I have a background in marketing and content and stuff. I used to actually my career originally started in journalism, covering professional sports, way back almost like a decade ago. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, but I spent a lot of my 20s actually out in the Sacramento area where I covered the NBA Sacramento Kings and was around that team for quite some while. And then my career in life took me to Las Vegas where I that's where I actually ended up initially getting my feet wet in marketing, doing some stuff for a hospitality group there called Hakkasan Group, and they have quite a few restaurants, some nightlife options out there on the Las Vegas Strip and worldwide. And was there for a year, and then after that, my life kind of took me on this different kind of path where I started to travel quite a bit more. And in 2016, I spent basically half the year just backpacking through Europe. I left that job in Las Vegas, to go and kind of vagabond for a little more than half a year, and that really opened my eyes up to the way people do things around the world, different ways that people are living life. And so I had actually been spending the last few years just kind of bouncing around from place to place, and then COVID hit, and I've just basically been in California ever since, and that's where I am now, like working here with Video Husky, and basically out here trying to help content creators do their thing.
Well, I think most people who have seen our work knows that one of the things that I find sometimes challenging is me sharing my own work. Like I make all these videos on my phone, and then I'm just like, oh, I want to just throw it out there like that. And so I'm really excited that in this what is going to happen next is taking a lot of this content and beginning to get it used, and not only used but getting it put out in the world, which was what my original intent of creating it was. And I think I just began to overthink it and I'm excited. So part of my own mask is like this mask of what do I got to say? Well, like, why do people want to
Mhm.
listen to me? Like even just
Yeah.
getting out of my own way of letting the content just go free. Just like don't even edit it. Just put it out. Just whatever. It doesn't matter. And thinking that it always does matter, or at least that's a story I tell myself. So I'm excited that we're in this conversation because the work that we try and help people do around masks is what is it that you are letting people see, and what are the things
Mhm.
that you're not talking about that's stuff happening behind the mask. So you and I are gonna go through the adventure together, or at least the mask activity together.
Uh-huh.
Are you ready for that?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so you got a piece of paper handy? Got a piece of paper
Yes, I
handy?
do. I got a
Okay.
piece of paper right here.
All right, and I'm gonna grab. Okay, there's an incense. I don't know. Can you? This is kind of funny. Do you see smoke? Do you see smoke?
No, I don't see
Oh,
that. I don't see anything actually
okay,
coming
good,
up on
good.
my screen.
'Cause I was like, there's like a stream of smoke. Like I was like, am I on? Is this house on? Is it on fire? No, it's not on fire. It's an incense over there, and the smoke is pretty thick. It was pretty interesting. I was like, can somebody see the smoke?
Mhm.
Um, but what we're gonna do is you and I are it's 3 steps. This activity, we've done this activity with thousands of people from more than 40 countries who have made
Wow.
masks. We've collected over 50,000 masks.
Mhm.
Um, and it's 3 steps. So the first step, on the left side of the paper, we're gonna just label. Maybe fold the paper in half. If you have a piece of paper, just fold it in half, or draw a line down the middle. And that's what we're gonna pretty much show together after we finish. And the left side, I want you just to call it the front.
Should I have it horizontal or portrait like this?
Probably horizontal will be easier, just because you're gonna do
Okay.
left and right. Yeah, you do
Okay,
left and
cool.
right. So you'll have the front.
Got it.
Well,
I've got the line in the middle.
okay. And then on the left side, we're going to call it the front, and the right side, we're going to call it the back.
Okay.
And the front and the back of mask. Um, Now, when we talk about mask, we're talking about like uh, whatever you think a mask looks like. I would like you to, on the left side, the first step is to draw a mask. So the first step is on the left side where it says front of mask, draw a mask.
Okay.
Okay.
Just like an actual mask.
Whatever you draw is going to be perfect. Yeah. So, yeah, we've been doing this campaign for since 2015, or we started making masks in 2015, but uh, only recently has when we go to schools and they make masks, everyone's drawing a personal protection mask.
Oh, yeah.
But we're thinking of like, originally it was just, well, what kind of masks do you think of when you, but what masks are out there in the world that you would draw, right?
And this
So
is
don't
like
show
a
you, don't show it
oh,
yet,
no,
don't show it yet. Yeah,
don't
not yet,
show it
not
yet.
yet.
Okay,
No,
gotcha.
you're fast. You're fast. Let me get caught up. I'm talking.
I drew something very simple because I was
Okay,
thinking of like Jim Carrey, The Mask, that movie from back in the
nice.
day.
That's right. That man. Maybe. Thank you for mentioning him. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
I actually happened to see that movie the other day
Oh,
recently.
really?
Yeah, well, it was on some show. I was like, yes, it was one of my favorite movies before I been doing any of this work around masks.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So we got a mask. Now I want
Okay.
you on the left side. You're gonna write 3 words. The left siders, which is the front of the mask. What are 3 qualities and characteristics of yourself that you gladly let the world see?
Okay.
So, what are 3 qualities and characteristics about yourself that you gladly let the world see? And write those anywhere on the left side. Hmm.
Okay. I
Okay,
got
so that's
3
the
down.
front. All right. So that's the front of the mask. And now we're gonna move to the back of the mask. And the back of the mask is different than the front of the mask. The back of the mask are 3 things you normally don't let people see. Things
Okay.
you normally don't talk about, but 3 that you feel comfortable sharing here today. 3
Okay.
things
Dang, this is kind of tricky.
okay.
Is this the part that's hard for your guests? It's like trying to figure this out. Like, what are you comfortable with sharing, right?
Right. Yeah, and I think that yes, because normally when we do activities and workshops, and like today with workshop, when students are writing, I think they're also thinking that, well, what are we going to have to do with these cards? You already know the finish line, that we're gonna share them. But in the workshops, they don't know, so they're writing, and then you're like, okay, pass them in, right? And they're like, oof, right?
Yeah.
But then we end up picking some random ones and sharing them out, you know. But I think in this case, yeah, it's like, well, what am I willing to let people see that I don't usually talk about? And I think you want to think of a spectrum. So there's the things that you just that don't come up. Maybe you'd be willing to talk about them, but they just don't usually come up because no people don't ask about them. And then you have
Oh, yeah.
the extreme things that you have just chosen never to talk about. So it's not asking people to share things they don't want to share. It's just
Gotcha. Okay,
what are
that helps.
okay, right on. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it. Yeah, I think what are the things you just don't usually share, but it's also an opportunity to you and I will get to know each other a lot better in this conversation. All right.
Hmm, okay. I think I have 3. I think I got those 3 down.
Okay.
I don't know if these will I don't know if these will work, but hopefully they do.
Well, it's perfect. Whatever you create, whatever you write, it's going to be perfect. Um, it's really about just building that space for connection. So, Jonathan, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first? Sharing the mask.
Yeah, I'd be happy to go first.
Okay, so just share the front, and if anything you want to say about the front, you can say it, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Yeah, I mean on the front, I the 3 things that I put down were just empathy slash kindness, um, intelligence, articulating, and curiosity.
All right. Anything you want to say about the front before I move to my front?
No, I think I'm good. Well, I'm
Okay.
curious to see what you said for
Okay.
yourself.
All right. Well, here's the front of the mask. The front is, let me see, passionate, caring, and dedicated. Those are the parts of myself that I let people see.
Mm,
Yeah, and I was trying to decide after I wrote passionate, I was like today I was in our workshop today, like one of our team members who shared a story before mine. Uh, I didn't know he was going to share the story he shared, and it hit me.
mm,
Like it hit me emotionally, and I was like, "Oh boy!" Like it was one of the moments where you're like, I wasn't prepared to follow that story, right?" And he spoke about a really personal story about his mom, and I was like, "Oh goodness!" And I just felt it. The wave of emotion happened, and I was, it's 150, 17 and 18-year-olds, 16 and 17-year-olds, middle
mm.
juniors, and I was like, okay, Shanti, you got to finish this presentation. I mean, I'm barely starting. It's like the first like 20 minutes of the workshop, and I'm like feeling myself tearing up, and I'm like, And I just told everybody, I said, you know what, I'm really feeling that. I didn't know he was going to tell that story, and I appreciate it. And I just had a moment of just like really like just being human right there in that moment, but also just trying to also thinking I'm at work, right? Like, I mean, my work is to be open and clear and caring and passionate, but passionate is like I still got to get the thing done. So I was like in that moment of like, oh my goodness, Shanti, you better pull it together, and I was able to pull it together in a couple of minutes, but it felt beautiful just to look at the eyes in the audience, and they were looking at me, and just with care, right?
Mhm.
Because normally if I'm gonna tell a story that's really powerful, I'm preparing myself that I'm gonna tell it, but I need to hold it to a level so I don't lose control on stage. I'm literally on stage, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and so yeah, that's what. So and then dedicated was like, you know, I think being dedicated to the work, right? In my younger, when I was their age, I would never let anybody see me cry ever.
Mm.
At 16
Yeah,
years old, 17, man, you tripping.
yeah.
But now it's like I'm dedicated to like helping young people break free. So I need to demonstrate what it's like to break free from that emotional mask if I'm gonna expect them to know that it's okay to do it, right? Like I think,
Yes, yes.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah,
that's the
you have to show. you have to show vulnerability. I think it's always been, we talk about like the idea, a lot of people talk about the idea of like earning trust or things like that, but I think like people have to it's best when you take the onus upon yourself to try and build and foster trust with others, rather than like, this whole approach of having your arms crossing, like you got to prove yourself to me, like it's just like why don't you prove yourself to the other person, right? And that's kind of like showing that you're a leader in that sense, because if you're taking that first step, that first move, then others will follow.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that, and the hope is that it comes off as not a planned. Oh, now it's time to
It's
cry.
not
So,
yeah. It's
ooh,
not
right, like,
stage yeah, it's not staged,
yeah,
it's not faking it, it's
yeah.
just like
It's like,
you're in that moment, you're feeling the emotions,
that's
and you're
right,
just kind of letting it, wash over you, and you're in it, right? Rather than
that's right,
like, again, like rather than just trying to stage it for this like, "Oh, this is cue the waterworks here." Like you're not trying to do that at all.
that's right. That's definitely not anywhere near where my. And today was not when it happened. It was like, oh my goodness! I literally, it was like one of the moments where I was like, oh, like I usually know when it's gonna come, or like not know when it's gonna come. Like it's one of the ones where it shocks you, right? It's like, oh boy, oh boy. And this one had a group of young men that came in all together. They were a bunch of group of friends, and even though I'm an adult, like you watch that energy, and I know uh, where I was at that age. I'm like, what? There's a man crying here. What's going on with this? There's no men don't cry, right? That's what I would have said if I was 17. So I think that
Yeah.
making that space for them to just be human and to know that it's going to be hard for some of them. It's going to be hard for them to get to that place. I wasn't there when I was their age, so I get it, not being there. And I hope they find it soon, the space where they can be fully themselves. So yeah, man, that's the front. And man, just take a deep breath, maybe. Just take a deep breath because we're gonna move into the back now. And you're going first.
Yeah.
All
Okay.
right. There we go.
Well, on the back, was I supposed to draw another mask there too, by the way?
No, no, the bag has no
Okay.
mask. No.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. Again, you might not be able to see this like that well, but I basically wrote race and just being an Asian American person here in this country in the US. I think the second thing that I wrote about was what it means to be a man in the present day, in this society that we live in. What is masculinity? And then the third thing that I wrote down was money.
Mm, right
And
on.
these are things that I think most, when you told me earlier, like they can be things that, you know you may be thinking about, or but you don't really get often asked about, or you get to show because there isn't necessarily like a curiosity about that. These are some of the things that come to mind, because they're obviously something. I mean, it's ironic, right? When I'm looking at this, I'm just spitballing here, but these are things that are like the that I put on the back of my mask, but they're things like that are so obvious and in front. Like you can see that I'm an Asian American person. You can see that I am a man. And money is like always, a topic of it's always a topic that is on the minds of people, yet it's like a very sensitive subject that I think people are afraid to talk about, because you know it can be like it can serve as like an indicator of how well you haven't done in life, which to me is kind of not. That's not. You shouldn't be comparing yourself to others in regards to how much money you have. You should kind of be playing that comparison game with yourself, if that makes
Mm,
sense.
yeah. What? But wouldn't it? But wouldn't it? Oh no, it's great. Yeah, thank you for saying that. Because I think about money a lot.
Hmm.
More on the side of not having money, right? More on the side
Yeah.
of like wanting to make more, and like
Yeah.
uh, growing up wanting to be rich and working hard to go to college to get a career that was going to make me a lot of money, and then leaving that career to go become a teacher was a
Hmm.
big a big decision, right? It was a big decision. It was also a big ego uh, kick in the, like, it was like, oh, I can tell how people respond and how they act when I used to tell them I'm an engineer compared to I tell them I'm a teacher.
Mm.
Right. And now that I run a nonprofit, it's like, oh, okay. I mean, I don't know
Yeah.
how far down the scale you can go, and I'm like, in terms of financial well being, when you're like, what? But I think that I remember the feeling definitely the first 2 years afterwards. And I just, oh yeah. And then I would throw in, oh, well, I was an engineer, and now I teach, right? I'd always have to like throw. I feel like I felt the need to throw that in there because I didn't really like the way people were like, "Oh, it's so noble of you to be a teacher. Oh, that's such a great thing you're doing." But when I'm an
Mm.
engineer, if nothing else, I'm smart, or perceivably, and I make good money. When
Mhm.
I'm a teacher, it felt like it was like a pity. It was like, "Oh, wow. Thank you for doing that," right?
Yeah,
Like the
yeah.
job that no one wants to do, right? And I think that that was hard. So when you talk about money, I think that's one that um yeah, people don't talk about. And with my friends, I think when we were in engineering, we talked about money because, who got the bonus? Well, the bonus, okay, you're gonna make it. Who's gonna make it to six figures first, right? We were all out of college, just trying to, and then I leave and go the opposite direction. We're like, I don't want to talk about this at this lunch. Let's not talk
Yeah,
about the money game right now, because
yeah,
I'm going the other direction right now. Unfortunately, But
right.
did you feel do you around money? Just, and I'm gonna show the back of mine, but I just want to say, do you feel like you don't talk about it be- because people have a hard time hearing about it, or it's just a conversation that's just in the group of people who you kind of spend more time with, they don't talk about money? Is money
I
hard to talk about?
I think it's more of like the first thing you said. You know, I'll talk about it with people if they're open to it, but at the same time I also am just very sensitive uh about the idea of broaching it, just because again, like, people have different kinds of relationships with it. Like, I think, i- if you grew up with a very in a place where the money was very scarce, then like you could have a very maybe like abusive relationship with money as you get older. And then see, even then, if you have it in abundance and stuff like that. But I don't know. I mean, it's something that again, like, I think about a lot, and I think about it in the sense of trying to trying to approach money in a way where I am like, I'm managing it, I'm in control of it, it's not controlling me, right? I think that oftentimes the conversation around money is feeling like I can never feel like I can get a grasp on it. But I think, like, there are principles, at least from me, like what I've learned in recent years, there are principles that you can learn to figure out how to have more of a handle on your finances, because there are certain things that I believe that you can control in regards to money, especially when it comes to spending. Like, that's probably the one variable that can be controlled versus, say, the idea of how much money you make. We can't always like predict, when we're going to get the next bonus or if we're going to get a raise or anything like that. But how much you decide to spend is, I think, definitely something within your grasp there.
Hmm. I used to meet with a group of financial, like, people who spend a lot of time working on finances, and they said it's not about how much money you make; it's how much you keep.
Yeah.
Right? That's what they say, right? So if you make $10 and you spend $10.01, you're gonna constantly be in debt, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's yeah, those are the thoughts around that. I mean, maybe we'll come back to some. Maybe you'll have some thoughts, but maybe we'll come back to the other ones that you shared. I'll share the back of mine, so then we can just let the conversation take it where it needs to go. Um,
Okay, sure.
all right. So on the back of mine, I wrote
Mm.
um, my brother's mental health, getting older, and the cost of building a big organization. And I
Mhm.
meant not the financial cost, but more of just like as our team is getting bigger, we're 10 people now, and it's like, when it's small, you can check in with everybody every day almost. You can check in, see how they're doing. And then, I mean, we're only 10 right now, so it's not really big, but like I realized, oh, I haven't talked to this person in like 2 days. Like,
Mhm.
like, hmm. And because some people are working remote in different situations, but what happens when you move to 20, 40, 50? I mean, there may be people on the team I don't even know. And I'm talking about in small scale because we're a small organization growing, but I feel that thought, right? I feel that thought of like, what are the other external costs? What are the additional costs of a big organization um, when you're growing, that growing phase, right? I mean, it's already growing pains of just growing itself, right? Raising enough money to be able to make sure you pay everybody and make sure you pay people a living wage and pay them well and all those things. It's been more in my mind recently. I didn't even realize until a couple of weeks ago that I was managing 10 people because
Mm.
I'm just sometimes going just so fast. And we brought on our first full-time hire, and we just have a lot of things have been getting more organized, and it's been like beautiful to watch. And I'm like, oh goodness, like I was keeping a whole lot of different tops spinning. You imagine keep a bunch of tops spinning. um, you sometimes are not, you're just doing the thing to keep it moving. You're not really paying attention to it. And now you got to see from the outside, like, oh, okay, that top is not, I'm not trying to describe people as tops, but I'm saying the sense of like how do you be more efficient with what you're doing as an organization, as you're growing.
Mhm.
And then the other one I'll speak about is my brother's mental health. That my brother showed up at my house this morning at midnight asking for some food and a ride.
Mm.
And I'm like, dude, do you know it's like it's after midnight? Like, what are you talking about? Like, why? And I know I don't want him walking around the streets of Oakland in that, knowing what he's already that navigating with, but I'm also irritated.
Yeah.
And I'm also like frustrated that he's like
Mhm.
not respecting my time. And how much of you disrespecting my time do you get? You're disrespecting my time, and or are you just kind of in your own head and getting what you need or want, right? And
Right.
and I have those conversations, and I think they don't do any good. But yeah, I was really that's really present on my mind. I don't talk much about it, but it weighs on me, especially when I have to go drive him somewhere 1 a.m, and I'm now exhausted, and it just it's one of those things where I love him, I want him to be safe, but also I'm like, how do you hold them accountable? And how do you hold somebody accountable if you
It's
don't
so
know that
hard.
they can get the accountability, right? So,
Yeah, it's so
yeah.
hard. I think it's like, that situation that you're describing reminds me, actually, I have an uncle who is like that. My mom's older brother, and unfortunately, he has kind of been in a place where he has been meandering, I think, throughout most of his adult life. And you know, God bless my mom for being the responsible one and offering him a place to stay at times throughout his life, especially after my grandmother passed away several years ago. But after a while, it's like you can't, you know, if he's not following the rules or doing the right things, and it's like, hey man, you can't stay here for that much longer at this house, like at my mom's place. You can't you can't stay here like and keep doing the things like habitually crossing the line that you continue to cross, like, but then you let them go and then you still kind of worry about their well-being, like I remember even running into him uh like 2 years ago. I was back in California from I was traveling abroad and was back here for a little bit, and I remember going to a gym to go work out, nearby gym, and I was sitting in the sauna and I saw this man like just putting stuff, in the locker, and one of the lockers there, he looked pretty frail and whatnot. And then I like squinted and I'm like, I think that's my uncle. And then I got out of
Mm.
the sauna. I'm like, hey, how are you? He's like, what are you doing here? He's like, oh,
Mhm.
I'm doing okay, or blah, blah, blah. Trying to act like everything is fine, but I know that he's more than likely been homeless. at that point. Like,
Mhm.
why are you carrying all these knickknacks around in little bags and stuff and storing them here in this locker at a monthly gym membership,
Mm.
place. So it's very, yeah, it's kind of disheartening to see that. But at the same time, it's like, man, like what else can we do when people like my mother and other people have tried to like offer you help, but at the same time, like you're not running with it in the right way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's really interesting because I experienced it in first person, right? It's like
Mhm.
how much of it when I talk to my brother about things, how much of it is controllable, right? If you have a, a, a mental disorder, if you have my brother has a schizophrenia,
Mm.
paranoid
Mhm.
schizophrenia, right? So
Yeah.
how much of it is actually so I have to be sometimes I'm upset. Sometimes it's like, sometimes it comes later and it comes and sometimes I'm just not in the mood. And I'm like, dude, like what is going on? But I think I always wonder like how much of it is controllable, right? Like I would much rather him come to a safe place than to meander. And I wonder because I don't know, and I've read a lot about it, but I'm also like, do you understand? Do you understand that this is called like do you understand others' emotions? If you have a situation where you don't even recognize others' emotions, do you notice that like I'm pissed off right now? Like do you notice that I'm like really upset? Or are you just like, can I get something to eat? Like with like no care in the world. And I'm like,
Mhm.
and I have to like catch myself. I'm like, okay, Shanti, you gotta be more patient, and I'm human, and I'm also frustrated, right? So I think it's the dance between trying to understand it, and knowing that I know so many people out there who are just walking in the streets. In Oakland, we have a huge homeless situation,
Yep.
and a
Yep.
lot of the homeless here in the Bay Area have mental difficulties or dealing with mental disabilities that are and you're just like, I'm like, man, do you know that you're not wearing any clothes? Do this? Not my brother, but this like when I see people out, I'm like, and my heart like breaks in the sense that I wonder, does anybody really love them? Like, does anybody? Because I know my brother, he'll push every button I got. He knows all my buttons. I don't know if he intentionally pushes them, but I do know that he has a good habit of pushing them all. Sometimes you do it at the same time. You're like,
Yeah.
dude, if, like in that moment, you're just like, okay, what's gonna me just making him leave right here at midnight means he's walking, how many ever miles to his place in a city that I know is not safe, dangerous, and I wouldn't even want to walk around in the city at night, right? So I think it's just yeah, I feel it, and thank you for sharing about your uncle. I really appreciate that. I think those are the things that I don't talk about much. I think about it a lot, but it's just more like in the back of my mind. Like I hope he's okay. I hope
Yeah.
and
Well,
yeah.
I think it's the tough part about it for you and myself and everybody out there, even if you don't have a loved one who is like your brother or like my uncle. My uncle probably also has some mental health issues as well. Is just when we see homeless people and whatnot, it's like there is this tension in you that wants to do something, but at the same time, like there's that tension is wanting to do something, but then also feeling like what you do in that moment is probably still not going to be enough to like change this major problem that they have. And then we often just end up retreating and and kind of just walking away with like our head down and feeling like helpless to it. That's what to me is like the hardest part about the homeless epidemic that we have here in this country in the US is like people want to help, but like, okay, I could give you like $10 or something, but how does that actually how does that actually help you really get back on your feet? Like that might be enough to get you a meal or something at McDonald's, but then you're still at ground zero, right? And so a lot of people end up yeah, and they end up like not doing anything. Um, and then they feel bad. They feel like, oh gosh, does this make me a terrible person because I didn't want to like, extend my hand in terms of giving him a little bit of something here
Mm,
or a little bit of something there, and I don't feel that is the case, but it's just because it's just a complex problem that like requires more than just doing, the bare minimum, really.
yeah. And thinking about that situation where I want to give, I don't want. How is it going to help? How is it going to help the big problem? How how have you reconciled the part of yourself that wants to help, but also it has that dissonance? Like, what have you? What do you do to just navigate the dissonance? You know.
I just accept it. I've come to accept that there's a lot of like tension and like you said, like you're saying dissonance. I usually like to call it like tension, internal
Mm,
tension.
yeah.
I think that's just normal. I think that's just part of the human experience. I will tell you a story that I think kind of really brought my mind to a place to accept the idea of this tension or dissonance that we fight with, cognitive dissonance that we fight with internally, to light for me was I when I went to South Africa a couple years ago. I traveled to South Africa. I was staying in Cape Town for about a month, and part of that experience for me was going to Robben Island, where Nelson Mandela spent more than 2 decades, I believe, in prison there, right, as a political prisoner as they were fighting against apartheid out there. And the amazing thing, if anybody has never been to Robben Island, about the experience when you go on a tour there is that you actually are toured the facilities by former political prisoners. So the tour
Mm,
guide who was taking us around, answering our questions about his experiences there, and he had this really like poignant story that stuck with me to this day about his time there in Robben Island. He was of the generation that came to Robben Island a little bit after Mandela, right? I think Mandela was in prison there in the 1960s, early 1960s. This gentleman was in prison there in the 1970s. So he's a younger person. It's almost like the difference between millennials and Gen Z these days, or Gen X or boomers or whatnot, right? It's different ideas, but they were still fighting the same problems. And so when his generation arrived at the prison, they looked around and they said, "What are you guys doing? Did you give up? Look at these conditions. What are you are okay with living like this?" And they were upset that like it seemed as if the older generation had basically you know slowed down, I guess, on making progress in their minds. But and so they decided to go and take it upon their hands to kind of push for more change and push back against the
mm,
prison system there. And but what they didn't realize is that the older generation, Mandela's generation, had the perspective of like, look, dude, we've been here for like more than a decade or so. Like, yeah, it's not great, but compared to where it was when we first started, it is much
mm,
better. Like, you now actually have a mat to sleep on versus like I was just sleeping on a concrete floor when I first got here, right?
mm,
Like, I
mm,
wasn't even eating much, and now I have, I have like an actual piece of bread to eat. Um, but the thing that this tour guide, former prisoner there, said was like, to me, he's like, I think we needed that. You needed to have that tension where like the young people were so eager to make change and to really like push almost to like to the disadvantage of what the progress that had already been made at Robben Island. But at the
mm,
same time, you still needed the older generation to also pull them back and try to say, "Hey, this is a long game here. I understand that you want to make change right away, but understand that we have to run this like a marathon, not a sprint."
mm,
But you needed both of those sides, like the older generation saying, "Hey, slow down," and the younger generation saying, "Hey, speed up." And then that tension is where progress is made. And I think
mm.
that was the thing that he said that was so poignant and stuck with me to this day about like, and we all deal with that, right? Like in our lives in terms of, you want things to improve, you want to be better, you want to be, you want to be wealthier, you want to be healthier, you want to be,
Mm.
all of these things, and you want it to happen now. But at the same time, like, you also still need to be patient, and
Yeah.
it's very hard to deal with that, especially as you're growing up, as an adult, like in your 20s. I know that a lot of young people, they deal with that, where they feel like they're far behind in life. But
Yeah.
as you get older, you realize, like, you know, things are where they need to be. But, you needed both of those sides ultimately to kind of push you to where you are today.
Yeah. You know, thank you for sharing that story. First of all, I've never been there. I've only been to Nigeria, so
Mm,
I have not yet been to Robben Island, and I do plan to go one day. I'm ready. I'm looking at the notes here, and I think I'm not going to Kenya either, which is, I know there's one of the last. I think it's called the, I forgot the name of the dungeons there, where they held a lot of um, the slaves, and as they were,
mm,
being able to shipping them off to the Western world, and I think thinking about that, thinking about what Mandela was fighting for, and what he stood for, and what things, how his name holds this idea of trying to push towards progress, even in the
mhm.
midst of odds, right? I get one question I would ask, and coming back to what you shared on the back of your mask is, um, when you wrote, um, did you write Asian, or did you write your actual nationality?
I
I don't
put
remember.
Asian American, but
Asian
I'm actually
American.
like Filipino American.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did did that, like, when you were there, like, as you were seeing what was happening in South Africa, and just in that, did did that you were traveling all around Europe, so you saw all kind of different cultures, and even if they
Mhm.
were more European cultures, where they don't look always that different on the outside, but very different, culturally,
Yes.
food, community, just the way the city looks and things like that.
Mhm.
How 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 I guess, how does that connect to what you wrote on the back? How does that, is that connect in any way? Like, you're exploring of all these different things, and being taking in those stories of different cultures. Does that speak to any of the part of what you put, the reason you put Asian American on the back?
Uh, yeah, I think maybe to a certain degree. I think I, I I mean, like, traveling and whatnot, especially as an Asian American, as an Asian person, like, I often have not seen, like, that many. Well, now you do, but historically in the past, before social media, you didn't really see people, like, going out and backpacking the world who looked like me. I
Mm,
think there are people, like, in media, such as, like, the late great Anthony Bourdain, or his friend and former colleague Andrew Zimmern, and all these other people who
mm,
have these amazing travel shows and whatnot. Rick Steves, right? Like, they're awesome, but, like, they're white guys. Like, there's nobody like me who I can see, and those guys inspired me. But at the same time, like, their experience, say, if when they're walking through Europe, they can blend in. When I'm walking
mm,
through some streets in Poland where everyone's white, I'm walking through the old town of Krakow, like, I'm like the only brown Asian person there.
yeah.
Um, and so that's probably like what it is. I mean, it was interesting for me to be in Asia in 2019. I spent pretty much the
Mm,
whole year there before COVID happened. And I
mm,
was living in Indonesia. I was in Bali for 6 months out there. I spent a month in Vietnam living in Ho Chi Minh. I spent a month in Bangkok living out there. And that was the longest I had ever spent time in Asia. Also went back to the Philippines too, to visit cousins and stuff like that out there. But um, there was something about that experience when I'm in Asia. I'm like, oh wow, I feel like this is where I belong or something, because
mm,
I blend in here. Like, even when I'm in Vietnam, like, I could definitely pass for an Indonesian person, a Malaysian person when I was in Kuala Lumpur,
yeah.
because Filipinos and Malaysians and Indonesians, we all kind of come, I think, from that same Malay heritage. And so it was
Mm,
cool to like to experience that because yeah, oftentimes, I mean, I think here in the States, the conversation about race doesn't include Asian people, to be honest. I think you're starting to see that change. We're starting to see more of us in the mainstream culture, and like popular culture, right? You had like Crazy Rich Asians, that was such a big movie a
mm,
couple of years ago. We just had our first Marvel superhero with Shang-Chi, right? The great Simu Liu, who started his career basically like doing videos on YouTube. And it's awesome to see that happening. But for the longest time, like we weren't really seen, and even if we were seen, it was in a very like one-dimensional way. Like,
mm,
and I think that's why, you know, it's important to me now these days, and I admit I don't have the right answers. I try to be as articulate as possible about
mm,
what it means to me, like my heritage of being a Filipino American person, but being an Asian American here in this country. um but as you get older, like you really start to understand like the gravity of it. Like my parents came and immigrated here from the Philippines.
yeah.
My mom came as a nurse. My dad came here and then built his career in real estate, and they came they started here really with like the help of their relatives who had come
Mm,
before them. But they started from scratch. And like anytime I think that things get hard for myself and other people in my generation as millennials or even the younger ones, and just I'm like, man, my parents like went through, I think, like harder times, like just try imagine like just completely moving to a different country and then having to adapt and fit in with that culture.
yeah.
So that is like something that is a big part for me that I think about often.
Thank you. Well, I definitely in our work, whatever forward, the last interview we had was a young man. He lives on the East Coast, um, and Joshua Gao. And what I'm really excited about in our work, we try and really be intentional about having multiple voices in
Mhm.
these conversations, because I think that oftentimes, you know, if the voice if we don't hear from the other voices, we could assume that they don't want to be heard from, or
Yeah.
that they have chosen silence, and or it's just that we're not asking questions. And I
Yeah.
think that in these conversations, even though I asked you that question, but we don't usually ask questions. I mean, relatively to questions, it's more of a conversation, right? So I guess in conversation you ask questions, but we want, in this work with men and talking about masculinity and talking about the masks we wear, talking
Mhm.
about why do we feel silent? Why do we feel that we don't get to be heard? And I think part of our work, and thank you for being here today, is like, how do we have more of these conversations where people can like process why do we not talk about it? Why do we not have representation? You're speaking about the more recent representation that's happening, but why is that the case? And so I just want to appreciate you for being in this conversation today. And, as we continue to invite people to talk about their masks, how do we make it easier, more normalized, that we don't have to operate as if we're invisible or that no one sees us? Because I think that we're definitely not alone. The question
Mhm.
is, if we believe we're alone, we may operate as if we're alone. So even when we see people, we just kind of like, we may not even notice them, right? And I think that if we can begin listening, we use this metaphor, what we should listen twice as much as we talk. That's why we have two ears and one mouth, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
how do we begin to have more conversations where we can listen more? So thank you for sharing it. Is there anything else you would like to share before we wrap it up here in this conversation around masks?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, the work that you're doing is very fascinating and it's needed in the world today, especially when it comes to to men, right? I think like masculinity, the concept of masculinity is changing, right? Like over the last how many decades or so, of course, like women have rightfully, and they should have more of a say in society, in the world in general. They should have more power, they should have more influence. But at
Yeah.
the same time, that has also changed the dynamic of what does it mean to be a man today, because historically what it meant to be a man was like to be the boss, to be in charge, to be this stoic figure who like shows no emotion and isn't really willing to like put themselves out there and be on the ledge potentially to leap from. And we need more men to be open about that, to be vulnerable, to be okay with sharing some of their insecurities, whatever they feel comfortable with. um because I think that there are a lot of men like that. I always felt like I was that kind of guy growing up, but just because of the way the culture was, you didn't feel so comfortable with like admitting some of your shortcomings, because it's like,
Yeah.
oh, if you do that, like maybe you're not a man or something like that.
Yeah.
And I feel like now it's ironic, because I feel like there's this concept that there's just more strength and power in vulnerability, because when you come out and say the things that you're most afraid of, then all
Yeah.
of a sudden it's just like gives you this boost of energy, this boost of confidence to be more comfortable with who you are as a person, whether or not you are the person you're supposed to be. You are the person you are in that moment.
That's
And
right.
so I again, I applaud you for the work that you're doing with young people out in the Bay Area, and elsewhere, and what you're doing with this podcast, because it's definitely needed. And we need guys to understand, especially young men as they grow up, like it's okay to be, you know it's finding that balance of being in
That's
touch
right.
with your emotions, and at the same time also taking responsibility and accountability for yourself when things don't go as planned. It's never going to be perfect. It's that balance will never be perfect. It's always like, I go back to the idea of tension and dissonance. It's always going to kind of be this
Mm,
seesaw process. But um, you know, that's just life. That's how I think life is.
yeah. Well, I think that you said that you nailed it in the part that if we can find the ways to be able to not think that we're the only ones and that we can talk about it, I think we can make it better for all men and young men. We start earlier where they don't wait till they become adults and say, "Oh, wait a minute. I do feel real stuff and I want to talk about it." We don't have to wait till they're already adults. Why don't we give them tools when they're younger
When they're younger, yes.
to be emotionally more well rounded, right? To have a wider vocabulary of emotions that exist and that we all feel,
Yeah.
that are not genderized, that are human emotions, because
Yeah.
emotions are human, right? I think that's what we try and do in this work.
Yeah,
So
it's just really leaning into that rather than resisting,
yeah,
what you're feeling inside and things like that. I mean, I think I've always felt that that is like, not always, it's something that I've actually learned as I've gotten older, to really just kind of lean into how I'm feeling in a specific moment, rather than
yeah,
just trying to like, got to dig myself out of this, or just like repress it. Cause I just think that ends up doing more harm than good in the long run. And so
yeah.
teaching people how to do that, and how to do it well, I think is very important.
Man, me too. Well, Jonathan, will you tell folks how if you want, if they want to connect with you, or if you're in social media world and you want people to follow you, will you let them know what's the best ways for them to connect? And I would love to have you share that right now.
Yeah, if people want to go and connect with me, one of the best ways really is just to visit my personal website. It's Santiago's, my last name, Santiago with an S dot space. And I have it's my personal website. I have some blog posts up there about things I often talk about with people in the past. And, you can reach out to me, sign up to my email newsletter there. And then, of course, like if you are interested in learning about the stories, strategies, and experiences of content creators, I've interviewed quite a few YouTubers, TikTokers, well, one TikTok person now, but these interesting people who are building audiences for themselves online. I host a podcast called The Video Craft Show, and you can check that out at www.videocraftshow.com.
And we'll put links to all of this in the show notes, folks. Jonathan, thank you again for being in this conversation. It's so good to dive deeper with you. I hope I feel like I've got to know you a lot better, and I hope you also feel the same. So thank you for being a part of the Million Mask movement, and thank you for being here, everybody. I'll see you soon. Taking Off the Mask podcast is produced by Ryan Louie. Editing, videography is also by Ryan Louie. Graphics by Kelly Wong. And a special thanks to the team at Ever Forward, Vanessa Cortez and Kevin Romero. And I'd like to thank everyone who's been a part of the creation of this podcast. As we hit this 1-year anniversary, we hope that everyone who's been a part knows that they're a part of the Taking Off the Mask experience. And we look forward to you being a part of it as well. If you liked what you heard today, please like, subscribe, and share. And we look forward to us continuing to offer conversations that matter. Take care. See you soon.